Okay, welcome to the Brád-Cast episode 6. My name is Anthony Brady, and today we are going to be talking about one of my most favourite topics of all, real-time management, RTM. The reason I've been particularly looking forward to this episode is because I started in RTM. I think a lot of people in workforce management generally do, and we're going to talk a little bit about this sort of idea of RTM being some sort of entry level, and talk a bit about perceptions, because I have some opinions and some thoughts around that particular perception. We're going to obviously talk about what is RTM, like what it is. As I've said in previous episodes, I'm not here to help. I'm not here to train anyone in these podcast episodes of actually how to do any of these exercises. However, I would say if anyone does want me to train you on real-time management, it would be my pleasure. Please do reach out. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about what it is, why it's important, and kind of maybe help you to, once you've kind of heard a little bit about what real-time management is, kind of, if you could maybe help you to position your own thoughts around how you perceive your real-time management people, and kind of how you might go about kind of engaging with them going forward. So let's get into this. Okay, so this whole idea of hierarchy, a hierarchy within workforce management team, and like I said, it is often perceived that real-time management is an entry level into workforce management. Now, I totally understand why that is. The reason for that is because you could take a view that it's relatively easy to train somebody on the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of the day over day, like of this is how you do this job, right? So how do you do this job? A large amount of doing this job is being familiar. Being familiar is probably an understatement, but being incredibly up to speed with the plan, the workforce management plan for that particular day, and all the way down into the smallest granular detail that you have. So it might be a particular market. You need to an RTM person who's going to be tasked for the day of looking after that particular market. That RTM person needs to know, okay, well, what is the plan? What's the forecasted volume? What's the expected AHT? Who are the staff? What's the level of shrinkage? Where are my plus minuses through the day? Where am I? So how everything that's going to go into that. Where are the parts of the day that might be difficult? What do I need to watch out for? What has been going on yesterday? Is what went on yesterday going to carry on into today? So it's just it can be quite hectic, and it's very much involved in just monitoring. So great. So it's about monitoring. But then, of course, what's the point of monitoring it? And if you sitting there watching the world burn, the purpose of real-time management is that as you're monitoring it, as you encounter variances, you need to think quickly. You need to be kind of making split-second decisions to reassess if something needs to be done, if an action needs to be taken, whether that be, okay, our volume's coming in higher, maybe we need to think about potentially cancelling some shrinkage activities, or we need to think about, all the way up to potentially we need to kind of reach out to operations and kind of maybe ask for additional resources in the form of overtime, or looking across to other areas of the business where potentially, they may not be experiencing a period of difficulty. Is there a way we can kind of borrow and help each other out? And it really is this sort of, melting pot of just watching the day, checking, constantly checking, is what is happening in front of my eyes the way it's supposed to be happening. And if it's not, you need to start shouting about it, right? You need to start communicating. You need to start kind of saying, hey, I'm seeing this. Like our volume seems to be high, or our agents are not the average handle time seems to be tracking far higher than it usually does, or what it's supposed to be at, as per the target. It can be down to technical problems. You're going to rely on real-time management. They can be the ones to say, hey, I think we have a technical problem. It looks like our phone lines we're not getting phone calls in, we're not getting emails in, whatever it might be. And so real-time management are at the center of like 100 million things, and they're juggling 100 million things all at once. So why is it perceived as entry level? I suppose if anyone hasn't listened back to one of my earlier episodes around, I think it was the What is WFM Anyway, you would have heard me in that episode talk a little bit about what type of what type of environment are we operating in. And you might remember me saying something along the lines of, are we in a cost cutting or are we in a business as usual sort of scenario? So that idea, that way of thinking manifests itself quite clearly when it gets to real-time management, because some people might take the view of all the hard work around workforce management has already been done, right? So, and again, I've been walking through a series of episodes here where we've been kind of going through the process, starting with capacity planning, then into forecasting, and then into scheduling, and then into real time. So the idea, there is a train of thought there is that, okay, well, if we've done our capacity planning well, and then we did our short-term forecasting, and apologies again to any forecasters I might have offended in that episode. I did not mean to do that. But if they've done their job, and then that leads to the building and the creating of onto our scheduling group, and then with those being the inputs into scheduling have created good schedules, and they've planned out everyone's shrinkage where it needs to be, and essentially we've built a good plan. There is this theory, which I do very much subscribe to, is if everyone has done all that really, really well and gotten it largely correct, real-time management should, in theory, have very, very little to do. And in a perfect scenario, they really should it should actually be quite boring, right? If you think about it, it should just be a case of like, okay, so there's the plan, and if the plan was made well, then it should show this is the shape of our business, or this is the shape of our demand for today. And as I can see our scheduling group have done a great job in putting all the resources here. Start of the day, the first and most obvious thing that needs to be checked is have the workforce actually shown up for work? Are they here? Are they logged in on time? Or is there an issue with people logging in on time and absenteeism? Is there a number of people who've called out? RTM at the start of the day, it's the most hectic part of the day, probably, because it's all about kind of like, are we actually even set up, or are we already, like, as soon as our contact center has opened up, we're already firefighting because loads of people called in sick, etc. And so now we're already kind of like, okay, what do we need to do? Do we need to borrow people from here, move them here, or, there's all that going on. But assuming that hasn't been the case, a lot of people would take the view of like, well, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be, no, the plan is the plan. The plan's a good plan. We would have signed off and reviewed our plans in advance a week ago or whatever. We would have looked at this particular day that we're at right now and said, no, we're going to be good. So therefore, really, what is real-time management going to do? I get that. But there is a reality, which is that very, very, very often it's not like that. I spent a number of years around real-time management, managing real-time management teams, and there was very rarely a day would go by where it was just boring, and there wasn't something going on. There's always something that kind of goes off track a little bit, that then does yield, I have kind of thought in my mind and debated with colleagues and stuff like that, which is that kind of like, if real-time management then ends up becoming this sort of like, it's always firefighting, it's always trying to course correct because the forecast wasn't accurate, or the schedule that was in place wasn't great, or we didn't plan our shrinkage well, or our operation are just, they're demanding extra activities to be moved around or inserted into the plan. If that's the reality, it does kind of almost beg the question, then what was the point? What was the point of having a workforce management process, and sitting down and making a capacity plan, and a having a detailed forecast and a schedule and doing all of that work? What was the point if at the end of the day it kind of all doesn't really matter for anything, and we're going to just leave it all up to real-time management to just kind of largely just cope with it, right? Just kind of like, listen, whatever way the day is going, we're just going to rely heavily on you. So I have debated that, and as is always the answer, and here's the always the beautiful wishy-washy sitting on the fence answer. The truth is always somewhere in the middle of these things, right? So it's almost never true that all of the upstream workforce management planning work has gone perfectly according to plan, and therefore our real-time management group are just sitting there watching it going by, going, yep, there's another half an hour interval gone by, and yep, there were 1% accuracy there, or there were 1%, you know what I mean? That doesn't, very rarely does that happen. And likewise, it doesn't always, it's not always the case that real-time management are, I've used the phrase firefighting. It's usually not that all day, every day either. If it is, then we're into kind of different questions, different conversations, and looking at the process end to end. So the truth is somewhere in the middle. There'll be some days that are quieter, some days that are kind of crazy and mental, and the true skill of real time management is being able to wear many hats. They know when to be now I'm trying to solve a technical problem. Now I'm trying to dig deep into understanding what's going on with our forecast, what's really behind that. Now I'm trying to understand our absenteeism, So largely the idea of real-time management being entry level is really to do with what your expectations are of your real-time management people, right? By the way, some people call them RTMs. I was called an RTM because I worked in RTM. Other organizations I've been in, where they actually refer to the people who work in their real-time management group as RTAs, real-time analysts. I don't know what's right and wrong there. Anyway, that's just a side note. But anyway, to do with expectations, what do you expect? Do you simply just expect your RTMs to, okay, I've seen something's happened, I'm going to, analyze the information I have available to me right now, quickly make a change, and then move on? Is that what you want? Or do you expect more from your real-time management group, and so much as like, I suppose over the years I've seen the power of information, data, reports, dashboards, etc., and I've seen them getting better and better, and improving all the while. You might take the view of like, if I was an operational person, or and I was keenly invested in the micromanaging the performance of how our operation is getting by today, I might kind of say, listen, I don't really need real-time management, because I've got all these great dashboards which are set up with alerts that if our volume spikes up, or if this happens, if our productivity is not on track, I've got all these great gizmos that will alert me to that fact. And so therefore I don't necessarily need to rely on a human being to sit in a chair staring at a screen, or multiple screens, and then telling me, so that's an argument. However, and this is probably when I was writing my notes for this particular episode, and I was thinking about what do I really, really want to say about real-time management that I believe is interesting or is important to kind of really take away. The thing I believe in real-time management is that its true value is in this word: why. Right? It's why. So anyone can tell you our volume is high. Anyone can tell you that our productivity is off. Anyone can tell you we're having a technical problem, or anyone can tell you and insert, 20, 30, 40, 50 other things that anyone could just tell you. that is not really useful unless somebody can say to you, this is happening and here is why it is happening. Or at least here is is a proposition, a suggestion as to what it might be. I'm now digging into it, or I think it might be this. Like, help me to dig in. That's the real kind of thing with real-time management, is because they are your, as well as just kind of keeping the keeping the wheels on the road or the boat afloat or whatever other cheap analogy you want to use here. What they're really here to do is they're like these obsessive, investigative, and fundamentally extremely nosy, right? Like, let's just call it what it is, right? They're nosy people, but they're nosy in the right way. They're nosy because they are invested in your customers. They're invested in the service, the customer service level that is being provided to your customers. And therefore, if anything goes off track, they're right there to kind of go, oh, what's going on? Why this? Why the other? And as they kind of go through the weeks and months and the years start to clock by, experience becomes incredibly valuable, because now these, the RTMs, they've seen it all before, right? They've seen 100 different scenarios, and so when they run into them again, it's amazing how quickly they can just kind of, they can sniff it. They kind of like, okay, something's wrong. Oh, do you know what I think this is? I think, this is probably, I bet you anything that, we've had an outage in, a particular region or whatever it is. And it's amazing how valuable that sort of insight can be. They really do become trusted partners, advisors, and anyone who tells me that if you were to kind of write a lot of that stuff down in the form of a job description and say, right, I want real-time management to do the following, and you'd have all the kind of the basic stuff there, right? I want them to monitor volumes. I want them to make decisions. I want them to kind of move resources around in a way that protects their business and keeps their KPIs where they need to be. That's all the kind of basic stuff. But if you were then to start layering on there, I want my real-time management person to be investigative and be business partnering and kind of collaborating with pretty much every other department in your contact center. And if you were to write all that down in a job description and try to tell me and explain to me that equates to entry level, well, I would laugh hard, right? So it hopefully, I'm not trying to make a case to say like that, you should not, therefore you shouldn't use people, or you shouldn't use real-time management as an entry-level position, because here's the thing, something has to be entry-level. No one, like, it's not like, you just arrive into workforce management you have to start somewhere. And, and it does make a lot of sense to me that a lot of people do start in real-time management, but that perception, that sort of almost sort of stigma that kind of goes with it, which is that like, oh, you're just in real-time management, therefore the implication being that what you provide in the workforce management process life cycle isn't as valuable as what the forecaster is doing, isn't as valuable as what the scheduler is doing, and even all the way up to isn't as valuable as what the capacity planner is doing. I would completely disagree with that. The reality is that it is every bit as important as all of those other functions, and I know it starts to sound a bit romantic and idealistic and the whole like we're all one team, guys, and we're all in it together, but it is so true. And that's why like the having a manager who can oversee workforce management, who's kind of had experience in all of these areas and understands that all of these functions are closely connected to each other, tied to each other, that's it. But real-time management, what I want to say as a kind of a summary, it's as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. So that's why I mentioned the word expectations. It's very close. Like, it's important to understand what are your expectations, and please don't try to look at your real-time management function as just simply as juniors, or as kind of like that they don't have as much or they don't have the same sort of analytical power as other areas of the workforce management team, or even kind of business analysts outside, and so on and so on and so on. So anyway, so that's my soapbox bit done on on what it is, and the sort of hierarchy piece. Now I covered off on that one. So I wrote this, and I wanted to tell you a little story about the kind of people I think make that there's a very particular type of person you need in real-time management. I've already mentioned, you need a nosy person, right? You need an inquisitive person. They have to be super communicators, of course, because like that's, they have to have, they have to be able to extract the information out of like 100 different stakeholders every single day. Of course, they're dealing with so many different people. People are always different, so it's not, you have to. It's an art form in itself of being able to kind of, trying to understand what's going on. Because if you try to take that sort of authoritative approach, you won't. What's the phrase? You don't catch as many flies with honey or salt or vinegar or something. I've completely butchered that one, I'm sure, but hopefully you know what I mean. Sometimes RTM need to communicate with an authoritative tone. Sometimes they need to have a kind of a almost like hey, so what do you think? I was seeing this. Are you noticing that in there? And you have to have many different communication tools available to get what you need. So the type of person you need in workforce management is a nosy, brilliant communicator. That's essentially who you need. And I thought about it. There was something. There was to kind of underscore what I'm talking about here. There was a person, I will not mention names here, but there was a person who worked in my one of my real-time management teams once upon a time, and this particular person wasn't exactly super effective. And the reason that this person wasn't super effective was having worked with this person for a long time, and yes, this person was technically monitoring and doing and making changes, was largely taking a lot of being led by the operation. So if the operation were kind of communicating with this particular real-time analyst and saying, I want you to do this, I need you to do this, then 99 times out of 100 the person was just going to go, yeah, sure, okay, I'll do that. There wasn't a huge display of independent thought or independent kind of like disagreeing or pushback or anything like that. But having kind of trying to work with this particular analyst, it suddenly dawned on me one day, because as it turns out, this particular person, I heard this person on a lunch break talking with colleagues, just and what they were talking about was talking about football. And it turns out that this particular person was a huge Liverpool Football Club supporter. And I was blown away with when they were chatting about, the ins and outs about how Liverpool were getting on at that particular time. And it was incredible to me to hear the level of detail and analytical kind of thought that this person was able to produce when it came to something that this person cared deeply about, which was, in this particular example, was Liverpool Football Club. So someone might ask a question like going, I don't think they're going to be able to, win the FA Cup this year or win whatever it was. And this person was then able to kind of put it into, suddenly kind of go, well, I think they do have a chance, because if you look at it this way, they've got X amount of players who are currently injured, but they're going to be coming back into the team soon. And if you think about, looking at the stats of their teams, they've actually only been, they've been kind of roughly winning kind of 80% of their games, and they've been doing. And I'm sitting there going, oh my God, listen to this person. If they were able to talk about the market that they are responsible for as a real-time management analyst, if they were able to talk about their day-to-day in even half of this level of insightful analytical kind of manner, they'd probably be the best RTM on the entire team. But they don't, right? They don't. And so when I eventually sat this person down and said, gave this person the kind of like, I heard you doing this, I heard you saying that, and it fundamentally came down to this, is because here's one of the things that like often doesn't get mentioned about real-time management people. the reason why this person was able to talk so coherently about Liverpool Football Club and is not able to transfer that same level over to talking about how what's going on with the occupancy, what's going on with they weren't able to kind of translate it over, is because it comes down to caring, right? The person cared deeply about, the performance of Liverpool Football Club, but didn't care quite as much, or maybe at all, but didn't care half as much about the performance of our operation. And therefore, on any given day, it's like, okay, yeah, so I'm watching the queues, I'm watching the phone, I'm watching the call volume, I'm watching this, whatever. Some days are good, some days are bad. And you could just tell that, like, when the day was over, it was kind of like, okay, whatever, today was a bad day, whatever, I'm not going to lose. Like the second I walk out this door, I'm not going to give it another moment's thought. Unlike with Liverpool, like long after a game has happened, someone like that would probably be thinking, going, oh, I wonder what went on, and would be kind of mulling it over. I think was a brilliant, I thought that was just a great illustration of the type of personality, the type of person that you're after. Somebody who can display that they are fully invested into the performance, not just in that day, but as almost like as a continuous improvement. Somebody who can kind of display that, okay, I tried something, we had some problems there yesterday. I tried moving more people towards phone, less people on email, to see if that could give me a better result. The day was over. No, it didn't. Okay, great. Almost kind of relishing. I can't wait to get back tomorrow. And I've got another idea. I've got a new idea. I think if I actually try to maybe blend more people into chat, maybe, and I think if I do this and I think if I do that, and they'll just keep at it. RTMs will just keep at it until eventually they find the answer. They find a way of kind of, okay, this is actually the most optimal way to maximize the results in any given day. Yeah, at least, again, that's at least what I think. I'm just one person who's been involved in this for a long, long time. But yeah, RTMs, they're not, please don't ever just look at them as like, oh yeah, they just simply look the queue, and if the volume is high, they put their hand in the air and say, hey everyone, did everyone know the volume is high? It's not that. It's an incredibly nuanced discipline, and I have nothing but respect for the people who work in real time. I do feel a bit sorry for real time management though, because I do sometimes think that you would have heard me mention in one of the previous episodes, where it's this idea of we're in firefighting mode, and no one seems to be actively invested in fixing what I would call the bigger picture. If no one's actively involved in fixing the bigger picture, because whether consciously or subconsciously, somebody in the organization has kind of fallen into a thought process of, sure, why would we bother when these RTM guys just seem to be able to pull all sorts of magic tricks out of the hat day in, day out. That might be true, but if it's hard to keep RTM people motivated if they can sense that, like, no one is trying to ever make their life better. So back to something I said probably 20 minutes ago, more even, is that, remember, the goal of RTM should be to get them to do nothing, right? Because if we're doing our workforce management process end to end properly, everyone should be everyone should be doing their bit to ultimately really lead us to a point where on the day our real-time management people have a largely boring life ahead of them. But if that's not the case, and it's like every single day it's like, oh, here we go again, we're short staffed, we're not even starting the day off with the right number of people. Then on top of that, there was way more people are absent than they should be. Whatever plan was put in front of them, if RTM are looking at that every single day and knowing, I may there's no point in even looking at this plan because it's not going to help me. You know, it bears no, this plan doesn't bear any relevance to reality. You know, that can become very, very demotivating. So I think it's important to kind of work with your RTMs to kind of demonstrate to them, going, okay, I know you've been working hard. I know you've been trying to figure out all sorts of new ways, tricks, methods, whatever it is, to try and help maximize our outputs here. But know this, through your help and through your insight, we've identified that, okay, we're fundamentally understaffed. Like I would have said in a previous episode, 9 times out of 10, the answer is nearly always we've arrived into some sort of understaffing situation. If you can communicate to them and say, listen, it's going to get better, right? We have a hiring plan within the next 6 weeks. We know there's going to be X amount of people coming on, and so therefore, this kind of day in, day out firefighting that you're doing is going to get better. Really, really helps, goes a long way. And here's another thing as well, just kind of looking at my notes and realizing I've just gone past the half an hour mark, so I'm going to try and not spend too much longer on this. Real-time management often are, again, depending on your business, of course, right, but often most people's customer service offering is not just Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Most organizations, they have some sort of customer service offering that is kind of goes into the evening times and into the weekends. And unlike most of your other functions, like so scheduling and forecasting and capacity planning and the you know, usually the managers and the team leaders of the team, they are probably all doing Monday to Friday, but not your RTMs. Your RTMs, of course, they, whenever the business is open, RTM need to be there, right? They are the eyes and the ears for everybody. So they need to be, so I mean, so that's another, that's another thing to consider as well, is that, like, you know, just like I would have spoken last week in the scheduling episode about how nobody really likes doing, usually no one likes doing evenings and weekends. RTM, it's just part of life, you know, and it's just one of the things that has to be done. And, you know, and a bit of practice what you preach here, right, is like, you know, so how are you going to convince a contact center of a couple of hundred, maybe a couple of thousand people that they need to display flexibility and get on board with being willing to at least provide their availability for evenings and weekends if you as a WFM team can't even convince your own team to do it? So, you know, you need to be able to share the load. But it's just another thing as well, like, you know, I don't often hear it doesn't get enough attention, or it doesn't get enough mention, is that, like, RTMs, they're doing an incredibly difficult job often under incredibly stressful conditions, and on top of everything else, they're doing weekends and they're doing late shifts, and, you know, they have to be able to and it's not a solo, it's not a solo contributor role. It is a team. It really is. I mean, because, you know, this whole idea of handovers and the whole lot, like, so, like, one person will eventually finish a shift or finish a day, and the next day a different RTM would be picking it up, and kind of, so it's very important for the success of the person who's picking it up that they've gotten some sort of, like, awareness from the previous, so that the handovers become hugely important. And again, that's not something that really has to be considered like between schedulers, or has to be considered between forecasters. They just generally, I forecast, this is my gig, when I'm finished doing it, no one does it until I come back to work next week. And, you know, so yeah, they it's a bit of a different one. Quick glance over, this is the part of the pod. I've realised, listening back to my episodes, I nearly end every episode the same way by going, let me look at my notes. But hey, you know, it is what it is. So let me look at my notes and see, is there anything I haven't told you about real-time management that I wanted to? No, I think I wrote down treat them with respect. That was obviously got a prompt for me to, you know, kind of go off on another one about. But yeah, do treat your RTMs with respect. Goes without saying, treat everyone with respect. But you know, particularly your RTMs. Your RTMs are, most of the time, and they're the greatest people in most contact centers. You'd be hard pushed to find a group of people who are more invested and involved and in the caring of your customers, and knowing what's right by your customers. You'd be hard pushed to find better people than your real-time management people when it comes to that sort of thing. So that kind of concludes this week's episode 6. We're doing really well clocking up these episodes. I think it's also going to bring me to a bit of a conclusion on this like series of what I was calling WFM fundamentals. So we've gone through all of the basics, all of the kind of the functions bit by bit. I think I will do one more before we kind of get into something a little bit more abstract than just kind of talking. And here's how you do forecasting. Here's how you do scheduling. I was thinking I'd do one more, and it's to do with workforce management reporting. Specifically workforce management reporting, and I think I might do that one next week. And by the way, again, apologies for the delay if anyone was waiting for this episode, if you've kind of gotten into a rhythm of expecting this episode on every Sunday. Apologies for the delay. I had it was the weekend just didn't work out for me, and then I also tried to record this yesterday, and I ran into some technical problems, as well as the extreme heat that we're having here in Dublin, and didn't help. So apologies. Hopefully you pick this up and enjoyed this episode as much as you've enjoyed previous episodes, and I hope to get back on track to a kind of a Sunday. Get back here on Sunday, and we'll kick it off again. So I will wrap it up. Episode 6, real-time management. If you have any questions, any comments, please do let me know. Otherwise, I will talk to you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.